Welcome to Heal with the Real, the podcast where we celebrate the incredible journeys of survivors who have turned their pain into power, becoming thrivers in life. I'm your host, Amanda, and each week we dive deep into the stories of resilience, strength, and transformation. Here you'll discover the tools and strategies our guests used to rebuild their lives and how they're now lifting others up along the way, from self-healing techniques to building communities of support. This is your space to be inspired and to connect with stories that remind us all healing is possible. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, share this podcast with someone who needs a little hope and encouragement today. And if you're on your own journey, let us know what's helping you heal. We'd love to feature your tools and insights. Oh, and one more thing. Stay tuned to hear about the cutting edge VR therapy software we're developing to revolutionize trauma recovery for survivors of DV everywhere. Now, let's get started because your healing journey matters and so does your story. So, welcome. My special guest to Heal with the Real today is BB. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. I truly appreciate you being here. And I'm sure some of the listeners will be so grateful for your story today because I've been reading your book. We'll get into that in a minute. But if you want to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about your background, what you do and everything, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my name is BB, and I'm a registered master's level social worker, and I work clinically. So most of my career, what I've done is work in the school system, and I've been I have been the person that I needed when I was a kid going through the school system. I'm being that now because I didn't have that. And that's kind of where my book starts, was me falling off the rails. And so that's what I've spent most of my career doing. I do a little bit of private practice as well. And in my early years, I started off essentially doing some jobs that were I was trying to help heal myself. So I worked with sexual offenders for a bit. I worked on the sexual assault crisis line. I was kind of trying to test myself to see where I was at in my healing and what I could go into and what I could do. But when I started working for the school system, I just found my niche to be able to give back and, like I said, be who I didn't have when I was in school.
Nice. And what age are the children that you're working with currently?
Yeah, so currently I'm working with nursery, so like 4-year-olds, even some are 3, but I don't work so much with them. They've got lots of other support. So I'd say kindergarten up to grade 9 for the last year and a half. But for the majority of my career, 18 years, I was working with kindergarten to grade 12s. So like
Ah,
5 years old up to, depending on their birthday, 18 years old.
okay, wow. So a good day, a long time.
Yeah.
Tell me, just because you mentioned about you wanted to pay back for, the way for your childhood. Tell us a little bit about your background in your childhood, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so to be clear, part of my struggle in my own story is that I had a pretty great childhood, like in my younger years. Where it started to go off the rails for me was I've always been like the only person in my family, I say, that it seems to have emotions or expresses them. My parents and my sisters are a lot more kind of even keeled. And so when I started to become like a preteen and a teenager, my emotions went a lot higher than everyone else's. And I started to really feel like I didn't belong in my family and that I wasn't understood. That nobody could get me. What I didn't realize, though, of course, because I was a child, I know now, was that around that same time, my dad had had an affair and my mom had found out. And so they were dealing with their own huge mess that had disrupted their lives. I did not know that. I just knew that while I was going through some big things, my parents were not available to me. And I didn't feel like I was cared for, loved, and I was just desperate, desperate, desperate for love. At this same time, my parents decided to move from the city where we lived to the country. And that was actually to get away from her and the memories and whatever. I did not know that, obviously. So my whole life was uprooted. I left from everybody that I knew. And this was back before social media. This was when we still had long distance within our own small areas. And so it felt like everybody that I'd ever known was just dead all of a sudden. Like that's how it felt. And I moved to the country, and it was in the last 3 months of my grade 8. So where I lived, we'd go typically kindergarten to grade 8, and then you would go to high school. And so it was the last couple of months before that transition. I didn't have enough time to get to really know anybody. The kids were really, really awful to me. I'd never experienced bullying before, but that's essentially what happened. And so I was feeling like I had nobody to connect to at school. And I felt like when I went home, nobody was available at home without knowing why. And so my hunger for love just grew and grew and grew. And so that's when I started, I was a teenager at this point, or preteen. And so boys started paying attention. And I had some pretty awful experiences with boys my same age, kind of just, you know, we
What
didn't
age are we talking? What age are we there?
Yeah, so I'd say like once I got into grade 9 and then definitely into grade 10, so those years. And so I wasn't really connecting with many females, but the boys started to be interested. And so I wasn't sharing what was happening with me though. I didn't feel like I could talk to my parents about stuff like that, and
Yeah.
they didn't seem available. And so my hunger for connection just grew and grew and grew. And that's really what prepared me to be groomed by a predator, is just this. Yeah.
We're going to get into that. But I just wanted, so I pulled up a few stats because I was really interested in girls maturing earlier than boys. And so brain development. So these are some of the stats. So by age 17, girls' prefrontal cortex development is estimated to be 2 to 3 years ahead of boys. And let me just have a look on some of the other ones. Risk-taking behavior. So boys at age 17 are statistically 25 to 50% more likely than girls to engage in risky behaviors. So like unsafe driving, substance use, rule breaking, things like that. And then social and emotional maturity. Girls tend to excel in interpersonal awareness and empathy. So research suggests that girls are 30 to 40% more likely to prioritize maintaining relationships and resolving conflicts constructively by the age of 17. So as a girl, that's huge, isn't it? Because we mature so much more, and it just kind of resonates with something that when we get to your book, talking about your book, really resonated with me, that we mature a lot more. We're looking for these older boys with cars, with a bit more money. As a 17-year-old girl, that's exciting.
Absolutely.
And I am a testament to that. You're a testament to that as well. What's your thoughts about the percentages?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds accurate to me for my experience and for the kids that I work with. Absolutely. There's definitely, like, it's jarring, the difference between same age genders. And so yeah, to look for it elsewhere. And also high school is not a place where a lot of kids feel safe or feel connected. And so when you start looking for things outside of that, well, if people aren't in high school, then it's either because they graduated or because they've dropped out or whatever else. And so if you're searching for something outside of your home and outside of your school, then it's probably not going to necessarily be so great what you're finding. I mean, unless it's extracurricular stuff, but I wasn't doing that.
Sure, sure.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the bullying part, because that, I really resonate with that. And I went to school and was bullied when I moved out of my area. So I moved school as you know, you've been reading my book, moved
Mhm.
school at teenage years, the last 2 years of high school for me, which was like 14, 15, quite crucial years. And I too, because I went to a school that didn't like the school where I was from, was bullied by the girls. Only for the first year, but even so, it still had that massive impact. And I tried to be a people pleaser after that, because I wanted the girls to like me. And I did end up becoming friends with those
Mhm.
particular girls. But I think it leads you into those patterns of people pleasing. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, and what your experience was like around the bullying.
Yeah, absolutely. Bang on what you just said. And I remember I actually folded, I dog-eared one of your pages because I was like, this is exactly, not exactly, but this is so similar to my experience. So yes, it was the people pleasing. I'd come from the city, so I was far enough away that the school I'd moved into didn't know my school because it was an hour away, but they didn't like that I was from the city and they were from the
Yeah.
country. And I didn't make that easier for myself because I didn't want to be in the country. So then that was insulting to them. Um, but no, I think it's just when somebody's different, right? For whatever reason that may be. And so it was really tricky. I mean, it started with they would steal, one girl stole my shoes, and then I would get in trouble for not having gym shoes, but it's because she stole them. Or it started with the making fun of me or putting me down or threatening other kids not to talk to me. And then, of course, we only had the 3 months until the summer. So in the summer, I didn't have anybody to hang out with. I wasn't continuing to build any sort of bond. Then we go to this huge high school where all these other little schools had filtered into. So there's even more people. And yeah, just like you said, it was really about people pleasing. I just wanted to feel connected. I just wanted to be loved. I wasn't used to that from my old school. Like, not that I'm saying it would have been any easier if I had been, but I was used to having a whole bunch of friends that I'd grown up with my whole life. I didn't have any sort of skills for how to deal with what I was facing. Um, yeah, and it just got, in your book, you talk a lot about self-esteem, and I would say that's really where my self-esteem started getting hammered. Was I was starting to be made fun for being so tall. I was being made fun of for having a really flat chest in comparison to a lot of the other girls who were developing quicker than I was. Um, Things that never bothered me before, I didn't notice before, they started becoming a problem. And my way of coping with that was actually to be the first one to make fun of myself. So yes, that worked in the sense that I beat everyone else to it, but it kind of doubled down on my insecurities for my own body, right? And
Yeah.
then, not to jump too far ahead, but when this man ended up finding me and starting to groom me, that was one of the first things he did, was talk about how fantastic my body was and how amazing my height was and all these things that nobody my age, including myself, appreciated. This person did. And so yeah, but that people pleasing, absolutely, just wanting so badly to fit in, to be liked, to be seen, even just to be seen. I felt so invisible. I felt like a ghost a lot of the time. It was one of two things. It was either I felt like I was almost being a ghost that was being like seanced to come and be poked at and whatever else, or being completely ignored and being invisible.
Sure. And then it pushes you out into these dangerous areas, of course. So your home life is not great because of what's going on for your parents, and school life's awful. And of course, you don't want to be, nobody wants to be there and get bullied every day. It's just an awful, awful time. And so I really empathize with you on that. The next part, so how did, because I want to just read, there's a little bit of a clip on here, a clip, but passage, should I say, of your book. And it's right at the beginning. There's a few bits that I wanted to pick up on, but it's right at the beginning where it's chapter 3, and it's New Year's Eve, you're 19 years old. We'll get right to the beginning of the story though. And you hung up on Sean and called 911.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to read a quick clip. Emergency. Do you require police, fire, or ambulance? Police, my ex-boyfriend is coming to kill me. What is your location? Well, I'm 2 hours away from him, but he's on his way here. What's your name and location? I'm at my parents' house now, and I provided the details. Where is the suspect now? He's at a bar in Burlington. Our mutual friend called to warn me. I'm so scared. And it goes on. I won't read it all, but that right at the beginning is quite shocking, isn't it? And, how did you meet and come across this man? I just want to say that this is your book, No Ordinary Love. I've, I've got all my things penned down here, just all the good bits on there that I just wanted to pull up. But My Ordinary Love starts with meeting this man when you just come out of school while you were still in school. Mm. And you met this person. So how did that start for the people listening?
Yeah, so I had just come out of another year-long relationship. So I thought I'd found love, but this was a person who was a bit older than me, not that much, but a bit older than me. So he was of drinking age. He was going to the bars. He was doing all these things that I wasn't able to do and cheating on me all the time. I was aware of this. And I ended up getting an STI from him and had a major blowout when he found out about this because he turned it on me. Like I was the one that gave it to him. So there was a huge blowout. It was awful. I was feeling more isolated than I'd ever felt before now. And on top of that, was quite literally diseased and had upset my parents because I had to tell them to be able to get what I needed to fix it. And so it was pretty much right after I physically walked away from this boyfriend of mine from the year, and I walked to a friend's house, and this man that I met was there. So there was my friend and his girlfriend. There was a young girl about my age. I don't know. She was from the other school in town, so I didn't know who she was. And then there was this mystery man who I definitely knew he was older than me, but I had previously lived on my own, like with a roommate who was 7 years older than me. And so I was already around a crowd who was quite a bit older than me, and it's hard to judge ages, period, but especially when you're younger. So I knew he was older, but I had no idea that he was 14 years my senior. So I was 17 and he was 31. I always say though, I don't know that that would have made a difference if I did know at right away. But yeah, so that's where I met him. And he had actually just come pretty much almost walked away at the same time as I did from his relationship, which I didn't find out right away, but I found out fairly quickly after was a marriage that he had walked away from. And so we kind of that's part of how he had framed it to me, is that we both walked away from these awful relationships and into true love, and that it was meant to be the way that we met and exactly when we met. And yeah, so that's how it started.
And is that a first red flag?
Yeah, absolutely. So much of it, like so much of it, because even in the very first night, that other girl I said was there, he started playing us off each other right away. And you could tell that he liked the attention, but it got both of us competing for him. So, I mean, that was before I'd even spoken to him, he was doing that, which of course now 42-year-old me looking back, red flag, 17-year-old me, no. And then even after she left, then he started in right away with, he knew that I had lived with that older girl I told you, I just mentioned. And I said, oh, I'm not there anymore. I'm back home. And he said, oh, like all this freedom to being back in a cage. So he was already finding a way to come in between my parents and me. And I had said I had a curfew and I needed to go. And he used that as like, you don't need a curfew. Like, you've already lived on your own once before. What are they trying to do to you? And then he very quickly, any issue that I had with my parents, which were ridiculous teenager things. They didn't like I had a tongue piercing. They didn't like I had a tattoo. They didn't like that I smoked. Obvious things any parent would not like. He found a way to come in and say like, don't they know that this is normal teenage stuff? Like, were they never cool? Like, they don't appreciate you. Or he would come in about my marks and he would say, you are so smart. Your report cards are so amazing. You don't need more school. You need more street smarts. Like, you've got school figured out. So he always found this way to drive this wedge further and further between my parents and I. That happened very quickly, so that whenever I would have a normal conflict, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate conflict with my parents, I would have him in my ear explaining to me how this was so wrong and so bad, and he was going to save me, and I needed to be away from them again because I'd already successfully done that for a year before. It was time to be away from them again. And so this happened fast.
And that's another sign, isn't it, as well,
Yeah.
that trying to bridge that gap between close family, close friends is
Yeah.
another huge red flag.
Yeah.
So tell me, I mean, I don't are you happy to go into all of the story, because I know there's some quite graphic things, and so for anybody that is listening, that I just want to say there may be a few trigger warnings for people. The moving in, so did you move in with him during this time, and then how did it go up to that point where that I just read, where you
Yeah.
needed to flee?
Yeah, so in the book I started Katie's first chapter. That's what I've named her. I started her first chapter at kind of, not, you find out later it's not actually the end, but kind of at an end point, and then start at the beginning. So that's how we started there. But for the beginning, yeah, it was only a couple months between meeting him and living together. And it had just happened after a big fight with my parents. They were saying, you need to be more present, you need to be part of our family, you need to show up, you need to not be miserable. And I was like, I don't hate you, I can be somewhere else. And called him and he came to rescue me and made this big deal about it. And that wasn't enough for him. He very quickly found ways to make sure that my parents were essentially upset with me. So he introduced drugs to me, and I went along with it. And he decided that was going to be the time we were going to go back to my house in the middle of the night to get things that he said I needed. When I was high out of my mind for the first time, having a total panic attack, thinking I was going to die, and I had to face my parents in the middle of the night. So he did that. And then another thing he did when we went back a different time to get all of my things, he robbed my parents. So we got my things. He started to dismantle like my furniture in my bedroom. And I said, no, 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 like that's not mine. We're not taking that. And he would always do this. He'd find a way to use how I felt my parents felt about me, which of course was not accurate. I thought they didn't want me. I thought they hated me. I thought I was a burden to them. And he would double down on those things. So he would remind me they were doing them a favor. They don't want you here anyway, and they don't need these things if you're not here, but you need them. They'll just be happy to not have any memory of you in this room. So then I'd be like, yeah, them, like, yeah, we'll take it. Anyway, got my things and left and went to school, or it was actually my school's like practicum, a work experience. And when I got home from that at the end of the day, I had found out that he had gone back to my parents with my keys and robbed them, like robbed them. And so this was a way where he was doing something. They had keys. The door wasn't broken in. The windows weren't broken. They did. I'm telling you, they're actually downstairs at my house visiting me right now. They 100% thought that I robbed them, that I stole from them. And so this was a way to further divide us. Um, so then he and I were living together, and very quickly, as you already touched on, he started then turning on my friends. So he had this way of using my age to his favor. He would sometimes use it when he was first grooming me to say, you're so mature for your age, you're so smart, you're so, and so he would use that as far as like, your friends are childish and they're immature, and like, I don't want to be around them, they're too young. But then he would also flip that later on once I was isolated to say, you're such a child, you're so immature, you're like another child to me. I have to raise you. So he would use my age to his advantage whenever it suited him. And so he started saying, like, none of my friends were allowed at our house. And they didn't like him either because he was a creepy old 14 years older than us guy. And he was bad news. Like, he was bad news. And so that's how it first started, is getting me away from my friends. His friends were all bad news. A lot were older than him even. And so uh, I was allowed to hang out with them, with him, but that wasn't always feeling safe. And so I started to really obviously miss my family and wanting to go home. And that's really when he started realizing he might be losing control. And as we all know about abuse, it doesn't have to happen every day or even every year or even every decade. It only has to happen when they need to regain control.
Yeah.
And so that's when things started getting really scary for me, is when I started saying that I wanted to reconnect with my family. And so yeah, he did a bunch of things. I don't know if you want me to talk about what they are, but that made me scared for my life, for my family's life. And when that didn't quite hold on enough, he proved to me that he could kill. And he took me from one end of our country. I live in Canada. He took me from one end of our country to the other end of our country to get me away from every single person I knew.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I'm only on chapter 17, and I've seen some horrific things. Um, by the way, it's on Amazon. It's out now.
Yeah.
How long has it been out? It's a couple of weeks now, is it, or a week?
Yeah, well, it was supposed to not be out until Wednesday this week, but so bookstores and libraries cannot get it until this Wednesday. However, Amazon decided that they don't play nice. They're going to release it immediately when they wanted to. So I think they released it on January 24th. So it is out. And I have had friends in the UK, in New Zealand, in the States, in Sweden, who have already bought it and received it. So it is on Amazon globally, which is
Amazing. Yeah, go get it.
exciting.
It's been my bedtime pal at the moment.
Oh,
I've been snuggling up and just reading this. It's been great. It's been lovely. Um, how did you, when you started writing your book,
mhm.
first of all, what made you want to write your story and share your story? Because a lot of survivors just feel the shame, all the things that comes with domestic abuse.
Yeah.
I certainly felt that for 6 months. I didn't even want to talk about my book. So it was published, but I didn't even tell anybody. So I just wondered what your experience was like, finally being able to go, here's my book, and really speak your truth.
Mhm. Yeah, so it started when you talk about the shame. So the first thing was when I was, and you're not there yet, but there was a part where it sounds like it ended. That's the 911 call, but it didn't. So more happens after that. But in that time after that call, I went back to school. So I had dropped out of high school. I went back to school and I had a creative writing class. And I wrote this, I was trying to process my experience. And the first thing I ever wrote, which is in the book, I've had to change it a bit, but it is in the book, was this glorified breakup of our first, I guess, breakup. And I totally, like I said, glorified it, made it this sad, you know, beautiful relationship and this sad breakup because I couldn't come to terms with everything that had happened. And so I was just holding on to, anything that felt normal. And so that's the first thing I ever wrote, which is in there. And actually, I've got the original copy of it right here. This is,
Amazing.
if you can see right here, it says, well, I'll cover it my full name, but October 10th, 2001.
Wow.
And so that was the first thing I ever wrote, but it was, as I said, glorified. And then I went into university the next year and I went in for psychology, found out what social work was. I didn't know what that was. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to help other people, but I still didn't tell anyone what had happened to me. And so I started using my own experience as essentially case studies or like standardized clients. So I externalized a part of myself, called her Katie, and then I would write about her and kind of unpack it, assess it, treat it. And that's how I started writing. So what I did was I picked all of the biggest most upsetting experiences that I'd been through with him, and I wrote about them. And so that all happened more than 2 decades ago. And then the book part came in my second year of university when I had a professor. I keep saying I need to pull this out, but somewhere behind me is this book. I had a professor have our whole class read a book, and I read it and I thought, oh my gosh, I have a story. I could write a book that university students might have to read and study. And so that's when I decided that one day I would take all these little bits of my story and I would weave them together and create what I have now. And so that didn't happen right away. I used myself and my story for both of my undergraduate degrees and eventually my master's degree. And I would just pick up and put down this story over decades when I could, when I was able to. And then what got my butt in gear was that my little sister, unfortunately, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the whole reason I wanted to write my story initially was only for my family because I still never told them or anybody else anything that had happened to me. I was keeping it all inside or on the paper. And so I thought I had time. I thought it was my parents I had to get it done for. And when my little sister was diagnosed, I thought I'm sitting my butt down every single day and I'm getting this done. And spoiler alert, I did not get it done in time for her.
Oh,
But
so
it is done now. Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
That must be difficult. But you got to tell her though, didn't you, in the book?
Yeah,
Because I've
yeah.
read in the book that you actually got to tell her and share that with her.
Mhm.
So yeah, I want to hold space for you, obviously, and yeah, brave.
Yeah, she was a huge part of pushing it along. Like she was such a private person, and when she got so sick, she had to share so much, and I wanted to share back. And she didn't want to talk about what was going on with her. She wanted to
Yeah.
make sure she was finding out what was going on with us. And so it was something that I shared with her. And she kept asking about the book and wanting updates on the book. And I wanted her to read parts because we knew very early on she wasn't going to survive it. And she said, no, I'm going to read it the same time as everybody else. And I said, I'm worried I'm not going to get it done in time.
Oh,
And she said, there will always be time. Like, just get it done. It will never be too late. And so I do believe that that she is aware of all of it. And yes, I did tell her many things along the way. And yeah.
so have your parents read the book?
Yeah, so in the different stages of editing, when I first had like this was the original I just had it printed for my beta readers. And so
Okay.
I asked my mom, because as you started to read, it shows a lot of the conflict between my mom and I specifically. And so I said to my mom, hey, how would you feel? I've written this book. And she knew over the years that it was a bad relationship. She knew the age difference. She knew whether she believed it or not, that he had robbed them, not me. And she knew, I think eventually I started using the word abusive, but they had no idea. So I said to her, I've got the first kind of complete manuscript done. Would you like to fly out? Because she lives on the other side of the country than me. Would you like to fly out? I'll book an Airbnb. We'll huddle down and we'll read it together out loud, take turns. And so she said yes. So she flew out. I booked an appointment with my therapist. To be clear, I've actually not had therapy about what I went through. I kind of did that myself, but I wanted my therapist to help to prepare us for what we were about to read together. I didn't want us to go backwards. I didn't want, um, you know, so my therapist was helping. We actually started at the end, at the very end of the book. I wrote a letter to my younger family. And so we started there, and then my mom and I went away for the weekend. We took turns reading the entire book out loud over a few days, and debriefing and talking about it. So my mom was actually the first person that ever got the whole story that I ever disclosed to. And she's here today. They're actually downstairs from the other side of Canada
Ah,
because I had my book launch on the weekend, so they came for the
oh wow. Oh, that's
yeah.
beautiful. That is so beautiful because I was really worried about my parents reading my book. And when my mum read it, she read it in one night and
Yeah.
posted it back through my door and just went, I'm sorry. And I said, look, you know, don't be sorry. You did what you did. You brought me up in a really great way. You know, they were good parents like your parents, fortunately. Um, but my dad wasn't quite there sometimes for me. And I think, you know, I left home really early like you as well. And oh, I'm glad that it sounds beautiful, you know, spending the night with your mum and just reading it together and just unpacking it all.
Mhm.
It just reminds me of sitting down by the river with my mum and telling her about my
Yes,
journey of
yes, I remember that.
why my ex-husband and I divorced. Um, I think it's nice, isn't it, just to feel like they understand. And yeah, it's lovely, it's beautiful, that just being able to unpack it with your mum. And so what happened after that?
Well, it still had to have many revisions and edits, and I really struggled with my editor. She's brilliant. So I'm not like, she is highly skilled and brilliant, but she is not trauma informed. And I could definitely tell that she had lived a privileged enough life. When I say privileged, I don't mean financially. I have no idea I mean privileged to have never experienced anything like this. It was very obvious. And I really struggled with that process because I had people picking it apart and, blaming Katie and saying they couldn't connect to Katie. And I had my editor telling me that this didn't follow the rules of the genre. And I had a lawyer telling me and my publisher telling me, oh, you have to change all these things so that if your ex is still alive and finds out about this, he can't come after you. And I thought, no, like, no, that's actually protecting him. I'm overprotecting him, but I understand that at the end of the day, it is supposed to be to protect me, but in order to protect me, I'm protecting him. And yeah, so it was a long journey. Like, even once I had the book, the original manuscript completed that I just showed you, it was a long journey after that. So I think, so my sister had just passed and my mom came out, so it would have been about 4 or 5 months after my sister passed, and we're coming up on 3 years in April. So that's how long, once I had a completed manuscript, that I had to go through the editing process, the beta reader process, the editing process, finding a publisher, and then this legal mess of trying to make sure that I was as protected as I could be.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? So, and then marketing of the book, it doesn't end there, does it?
No, it's
Continued process.
It's so, yeah. And like, I didn't realize at the time, I thought, that's kind of what publishers do. But I've learned that publishers, even the huge, big ones, they typically take their top 1 or 2 books for their year and they put all their marketing money into that. And it's really left up to the author to do it themselves. And it's so uncomfortable because I'm not the type of person who wants to self-promote, period, much less about something that's so personal. And
Yeah,
it's a weird thing, but you know what? I'm just doing it. I'm just doing it. And
good.
these podcasts are really what have helped to bring me out of my shell, to be like, just do it. And actually, in your book, and I say this all the time to kids that I work with, and in your book it says the fake it till you make it. I'm like, yeah, there is some serious value in that, to just do it. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and things just come along in your path. You know, when I left my job, I was a business developer for 12 years, and I left my job to set up in my own business. Didn't really know what path I was going on or where it was going, but I knew that I had enough money just to get me by. I had loads of things that I was good at that I could offer to other people. So I left my job and I just thought, what will be, will be.
Yeah,
And it's turned out to be the best thing ever. And I think stepping into your fear as well, isn't it? It's so
yeah,
important.
absolutely.
Otherwise, you just stay that same person in that same small place
Mhm.
and you never move, which is the easy way, which your mind tells you to do. But when you start stepping out into that fear, that's when your life really does move and become whoever you need to be. So well done on that. I appreciate that. It's amazing. So what's next for you?
Oh man, well, I mean, I was kind of just pushing this along so I could put it on the shelf and move on to another passion project. I've got a handful of things I want to do, but as you said, this marketing business and now I'm doing speaking engagements and meeting with you, and so I think I'm doing this for now. I'm trying to have like a goal of something that I focus on every month. So February is kind of like podcast university presentation month, and then January was family and friends month. And so I'm trying to plan it out that way. But as far as after this book, or as it kind of winds down, I have a book that I wrote on grief that I want to get back to. I need to get an illustrator. Well, I have an illustrator, but I need to connect with that. And it's actually a tribute to my sister, which started
Beautiful.
in this book, obviously. And then I've got a couple passion projects, but I also yeah, I think that I have many things I want to get to, but I also feel like I need to give space and for what comes out of this as well. I've never actually worked directly in domestic violence. I did, as I said earlier, work in the sexual assault side of things, which I've had many of those, unfortunately, too. So I don't know. My thing is, honestly, I don't know that I could stay out of jail if I were to. I don't know that I could keep my ethical practice if I were to work in the field. I get so wound up and so not triggered in the way of like me unraveling. I just mean triggered where I want to do whatever is necessary to help people. And so professionally, probably not good, but I don't know. I don't know what could come out of this. And so I'm trying to give space for that while at the same time I've got these other my grief book I want to finish. I'm actually writing a small chapter in a part of somebody else's book about grief
Nice.
as well. And then I've got this idea for what I'm calling right now. I'm calling them connection kits, and they're really ways that families, from all my work with kids and families, that families can connect to one another in more meaningful ways, but in really short amount of times without costing any money. Because I feel like if I had had some of those with my family when I was younger, then maybe things could have been different. So
Nice.
yeah, those are some of my plans.
Nice. You were talking about triggers then as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can we talk about triggers? Because there's a part in your book where you smell a young kid's aftershave
Yeah. Yeah.
and it completely triggered you in that
Yeah.
instance. Can we talk a little bit about what that little bit of a story was about, but also about triggers and how you cope when those come up? What are the things that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to for people who don't know, and you're not quite there yet either. So my book is written in like three different characters. And what I really wanted to show was how, so Katie is the one who is in the moment, in the middle of domestic violence, but then Alex is like 10 years out from hers, but I'm showing how she's still triggered. That's the scene that you're talking about, is an Alex scene. And then we've got Gabby, who's a couple decades out, but showing how she's still triggered. Because I wanted to show that just once you escape or leave, that is not when this
Yeah.
ends. I'm 42 years old and I have not physically seen or been in the same room as my abuser since I was 24. And I'm telling you, I'm triggered all the time still. So to your question, yes, if I smell a smell that he used, if I see a certain car, the most recent one that you'll get to in my book is one of my dear friends started dating a guy same eyes, exact same age. I haven't seen my abuser in a couple decades, so I don't know, but I think he would look just like this man. They have the same profession. They both have a brother that is in the same profession. My body, every time I was around this man for the first year, my body told me, it's him. It's him. You're in danger. You're going to die. He's going to kill you. And I had to really, really do a lot of CBT on myself to say, this is not the same man. He's not from the same place. He doesn't have the same name. This is not the same man, and you are not in danger. But everything in my body said that I was. And again, that's more than 20 years later. So
Wow.
triggers are so real. And to your question about what to do, I mean, a lot of, and you talk about this in your book as well, a lot of it for me is grounding. So five senses grounding. What can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I, for me, that's a big one, to just really ground myself in the moment.
How does
Um,
that work? Can you just talk me through that for anybody
yeah,
listening, how that
yeah,
works? Because it might be really useful for the listeners as
sure.
a strategy to deal with those triggers.
Sure, absolutely. So it's really just about thinking about our five senses. And we start with, well, I start with what can you see? So, what are five things I can see? And you're just looking around your actual environment to help to ground yourself. And I would say them out loud, but if you're in public, you don't have to say it out loud. And then it's what are four things you can choose whichever sense you want, but what are four things you can feel? I can feel my jeans, I can feel my hair, I can feel this table. And then what are four things you can smell? I usually do that for two, but anyway, I always tell kids you can always smell yourself. You've got a bit of a smell. If your hair is long, you can smell what your hair smells like, your shirt. There's always things you can smell. Taste is a little bit tricky, but what I tell kids is even if you don't, like right now, I can taste the coffee on my breath that I finished before meeting with you. But if you don't have a taste, it's okay to just run your tongue along your teeth. You're just trying to ground yourself so you can, just it's just the feeling is okay. Hearing, right now I can hear my cat litter cleaning itself. I can hear myself speaking. You can make noise if you don't hear anything else. And
Yeah,
so you're just going through your five senses and calling out certain things so that you're grounding yourself in the present moment, because triggers are really about taking you back into the past. And as terrifying as that can be, you're not in the past anymore. You're in
yeah,
the here and the now, and you are safe. And that's another strategy that I talk about. So in the book, Katie has no strategies. Alex has quite a few strategies that I show and talk about for readers' help too. And then Gabby has the most. So some of Alex's strategies, for example, are she would write on her hand in washable marker words like safe or loved. And I didn't specify this exactly in the book, but I use that technique a lot of time with kids who are self-harmers. So instead of harming yourself, you still can use a utensil and you can write kind or loving words. Or another thing that I have in the Alex section is to pick at oranges. She's got some oranges or clementines and she just focuses. It's still a grounding, it's still a mindful activity where she's picking at the oranges and focusing on the smell of them and the feel
mhm.
of the squirting mist and the sensation of the picking. Or another thing in Alex's section is because she's a school counselor, and she covers her hand in some white craft glue, and it dries pretty quick, and then she peels and picks it off.
Oh,
But a way
nice.
to bring her into the moment. And so just things like that, they sound so simple that a lot of times people can blow them off as like breathing, meditation, picking
Yeah,
off. But when you do it, it really truly brings you into the here and now where you know you're safe.
it does. It's amazing. There's some really, really good tips. I love the orange one. It's all about mindful eating because often we just go blah, 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 and working at the same time, working and not even paying attention to what we're eating is important as well, slowing it down. One of the things you talked about was the children and self-harming. And something in your book really struck a chord with me because I had a friend who pulled her hair out you pulled your eyelashes.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I still do that actually. It's hard for me not to. It's yeah, so it's that's actually kind of an absent-minded thing that I do, and so it's really about bringing myself back. I initially had started with eyelashes and twisting and pulling, and then it would sometimes it would be my eyebrows. It did for a short while. I did do some of my hair, but thankfully, I did find other strategies and got out of that. Um, but yes, that's part of these other examples that I gave in Alex's section. That is actually to stop from doing that. So picking an orange instead, peeling this glue off instead, using something to write instead, because you don't want to injure yourself or your body. And so it's just about trying to replace that with a different strategy that you still get the kind of same effect from, right? Like it's still a satisfying experience, but you're using an object that's not yourself.
And do you know when that's about to happen? Can you stop yourself now? Is that awareness there? And can you go, no, and bring yourself to the present? Because that's just, it's habits, isn't it? And it's about
Yeah.
changing the way those habits are.
Yeah.
How do
Um,
you deal with that?
I've gotten better over the years because it's been a lot of practice and I work with a lot of kids with this too. And so sometimes it happens for me and for others two different times. Sometimes just when I'm bored. So if when I'm reading or if I'm watching something online, then I can start doing it because my hands are just not busy. And so it's getting something else I can fidget with. And then the other time is when I'm stressed and I'll either do that or I'll bite the inside of my cheek. And as soon as I become aware of it, it's usually because it hurts. I usually pull a lash or an eyebrow that was still is still a healthy root, and so it hurts, or I'll bite my cheek too hard, and then that's when I'm like, oh shoot, I've got to do something different. And so I've got a lot of different strategies that I can use, but it's really just fidgeting with something else or getting relief from picking at or pulling something that's not attached to me. Oh,
What are your things that you use now on a daily basis that really help you and have really helped push you forward and become resilient?
yeah. So one of the things that I don't do this every day now, but I think it would be probably the most helpful that I would like to share with listeners. I meant to pull it out ahead of time. Let me just see. Is I think what it can be so helpful is to actually get a few pictures of your younger self and have those pictures available so that when you start talking negatively about yourself or you start beating up on yourself, that you can look at that younger you and have compassion and start to really reprocess like cognitive behavioral therapy. Your what we feel affects what we think, affects what we do. So this is one example of a little me. So I've got a little me who didn't care about anybody, who was dressed like a fool, and I wrote these words about her: brave, original, curious, playful. And I have found over the years, I don't do this so much anymore, but whenever I'm being hard on myself or beating myself up or, having that negative self-talk, it really is helpful to connect with my inner child, because I would never say bad things about this little one. I would never. And so it's really just about bringing it back to like who we're talking about. And that's how my book came to be. It started that I was actually, without knowing it, I was actually kind of writing letters to my future self. It was kind of a diary entry like yours was, Amanda. And so I was writing to somebody who could be who I needed. And I ended up being the person I needed. I ended up writing back. That's how the book first started. I was writing my experiences, and then I had it look like there was her therapist writing back to her, but really it was me. And so just to really be able to be kind to yourself, write about your experiences. You don't have to show it to anybody. You don't have to write a book like you and I did, but write it down. And then you're really writing about, and it doesn't have to be a young person. It might be you when you were 25. That's fine. But one day when you feel ready enough, respond to that younger part of yourself and show her or him compassion and
Yeah.
kindness. You're older, you're wiser, you're stronger. Be who you needed when you were going through what you were going through. We don't need, of course, it's great if you can find someone outside yourself. Of course, that's ideal. But we can do so much for ourselves in the meantime. And so that's part of what I try to do. Even when I'm nervous about doing a podcast with you, for example, I'll touch in with that's the younger part of me that's being anxious and feeling scared. That's not 42-year-old me. That's little me.
Yeah. Oh, do you know what? It's been so lovely having you on, BB. You've been incredible. And, for anybody out there, go and get this book. I haven't been able to put it down yet, so I'm sure the listeners will love it. On Amazon. Do you have any final words before we finish the podcast?
I don't think so. I'm so grateful to be on here. I guess the only last final thing I would say is how important it is to educate ourselves, but also to have a supportive community. Don't do it alone. The most helpful thing, even though it's just been recently, is when I created my book Instagram, is to be around other survivors and to be able to not only be there for yourself and your own healing, but to help other people heal. There's so much healing in helping somebody else. And so we can all do that together. So just make sure that you've got a supportive community, even if they're strangers online. Protect your heart and protect your energy and educate yourself. Because if we had had the education that we have now back then, it
Yeah.
would have gone very differently.
It definitely would have done. They're brilliant closing words, and just with the writing and everything, it's so cathartic, isn't it? To
Yes,
just write down, get it all out your head, get it onto paper, and like you say, you don't have to be an author to do that.
no,
It's important just to get all that page dump, I call it, get it out of your head. Thank you so much for being my
thank you,
guest.
Amanda.
It's
Thank
been an
you.
honor to have you. I wish you all the success for the future. And like you say, we all stick together and support each other and pull each other up along the way. I hope the listeners have had or gained some knowledge from today's podcast. But yeah, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Amanda. Thank
Take
you.
care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.